Okay, so I also have a hopefully short talk. I'm not entirely sure how well reasoned all of this is, but bear with me. So I'm trying to be a bit sort of higher level and conceptual here as well, and talking about more of the costs to the system and how those have arisen and how that changes in an open access world. So the legacy subscription journal model is obviously selling a product, which is a journal, to a librarian customer. That requires the publisher to own that product to prevent piracy. So that has resulted in the transfer of copyright, the ownership of a thing, and of course the creation and distribution of the physical product, the journal article, the journal volume being shipped around the world. So what that led to over history, I think, is basically a need to publish the best journals, because your customers, the librarians, only want to buy the good stuff. So you have a natural sort of incentive as a publisher to try and publish the best possible content in the best possible journal to actually sell it to your customers. And what that evolved into was a system of filtering articles into the best journals. And obviously that's been, I guess, co-opted by the peer review process. So the current process of filtering articles via peer review and having a high rejection rate for the best journals has led to obviously articles being re-reviewed many times and going around a loop many times and wasting a lot of time and energy. And it's also led to the creation of these journal brands. So the journal name, the product that you're selling, becomes a brand in itself, which has then come to serve as a proxy for quality and prestige in the minds of the marketplace of the authors. And in addition, you've got an entire infrastructure because of this business model and this legacy setup based on the distribution and the business model. So, for example, at a publisher, you have to have a legal department to defend your copyright. You have to have a billing and collections department to bill your customers and collect late payments. You have to have a rights and permissions department because you own the copyright. You've got a sales group to go out and sell stuff to libraries. You've got warehousing, dispatch, and so on. At the library, you've also got systems and services that exist only to support this sort of legacy business model. You've got to check in those journal articles. You've got to track whether you got what you paid for. You have to worry about interlibrary loans for stuff you haven't paid for. You have collection development librarians whose only job is to decide what you're going to pay for and whether or not that fits your needs. And of course, you've got third parties that insert themselves into the process, like subscription agents. So if those are the costs to the system, the costs of the system are therefore, there's a lot of internal efficiencies at those publishers operating those systems. There's internal inefficiencies at the library level as well. There's additional costs being loaded into the system because of the additional players, people like subscription agents, for example. And then there's perhaps the most important one, system-wide inefficiencies for academia, which have been caused by this. So if we just look at those first three, just quickly, and the first three, to remind us, are the inefficiencies at the publisher, at the library, and additional costs in the system. So born open access publishers have no need for most of those internal efficiencies that I listed off that the legacy publishers have to carry because they're carrying it because of their business model. And in addition, by starting fresh, they can create new efficiencies. They can actually be more efficient and less inefficient. If the world were to move to a fully OA world, libraries would also have no need for many of the inefficient systems they've come to carry because of this system. For instance, they wouldn't need collection development librarians. They just have access to everything. They wouldn't need to worry about interlibrary loans and so on. And I was talking about those sort of third parties that are in there. I think in this new brave world, there are still new intermediaries that will evolve. I think people like APC management companies, the third parties that take the payment. But presumably there is opportunities for improvements even there. But then if we look at the sort of broader concept of the inefficiencies for academia, and we go back and say, well, if the customer is now the author in an open access world, you no longer need to publish the best content into a single journal package because you're not selling a journal package anymore. You may be selling brand and prestige and so on, but you don't have a customer buying a journal. So as a journal, you actually don't need to go out and look for the best stuff to have the best possible product for the purposes of selling it. And that led to the +1 model, basically, which was publish everything Don't try and prejudge the quality. Have one big bucket, because you're not selling the journal, you're selling the services of publishing an article to the author. And of course, so if everything were to be reviewed once in the +1 style model, peer review for scientific and technical soundness, don't reject it simply for the basis of trying to filter it into a high quality bucket, then obviously a vast amount of time is saved in academia. However, the influence remain very strong in the marketplace. And actually, this gets to what Robert was saying, I think. What's broken here is potentially the fact that we have journals at all. Do we need journals as a package, as a product, as a thing in an open access future? At the moment, the only reason that I can think of that we might have them around still is because the marketplace is tied up on this concept of brand and prestige being attached to a journal name, and not being attached to price or service levels, for instance, which is what Rebecca was saying, I think, that if only there were more transparency about what you're getting for your money, it would be fine. But at the moment, you've got these sort of intangibles of brand and prestige wrapped around there. And many of the open access publishers, like Biomed Central, for instance, have still, I guess, dragged this legacy mindset into the open access world and still have a stable of journals where they try and create the best quality journals via a rejection filtration system. You've got some of the perhaps more advanced entrants into the market like +1 that's trying to move away from that concept and has been very successful, of course. And you could imagine a future where most of the content is published in a handful of mega journals, at which point brand and prestige is perhaps a lot less important in the larger marketplace. And if the customer is, and this is my last slide now, I'm conscious of the time, if the customer is now the author, what do they need to pay for? What is the base service level that they expect? Peer review and publication, for instance, and that's it. They get that at +1. PeerJ, all of these sort of mega journals give a base good level of service. They don't necessarily give brand and prestige, but at the moment, authors are still paying or expecting or wanting brand and prestige, and that showed up in Robert's data there. They're going into these hybrid journals probably because they have an impact factor or a prestige in their field or something like that. And what we're seeing, for instance, at PeerJ, we have an extremely cheap model, and yet we've not been flooded with submissions. Our service levels are equivalent or better than +1, and yet our submission volume is a fraction, a tiny fraction of +1 at the moment, and it's because, probably in that case, of things like the impact factor, but also because people are not paying for the service levels. So that's what they might base pay for. What might they additionally pay for? And this sort of question to the audience, really. But in this sort of future, they will pay for other things as well, presumably. Will they pay for fast-track peer review? There was a huge kerfuffle a few weeks ago about fast-track peer review, of course, so perhaps they won't pay for that. But article promotion services, manuscript cleanup services, that kind of thing. And then actually this gets back to Robert. Are there other customers in the marketplace with different agendas? So the funders, for instance. So in Robert's example, the author is somewhat insulated from the cost. They're not paying the fees. The Wellcome Trust is, and they have a different agenda. So those were just open questions for the Q&A if we get to it. Thank you.